Hi, everyone. Have you ever read the scriptures and come to a passage or a personage that perhaps you felt you wanted to know more about, but the Gospels or the epistles or the Acts were curiously silent about that? Well, I know I have. And one of these involves the very strange sort of insertion into the Gospel of Matthew about the wife of Pontius Pilate. Now, of course, we know that when Pilate was in the midst of trying to decide what he was going to do with our Lord Jesus Christ, that she came and spoke to him and said, "Have nothing to do with that man," meaning Jesus, "because today I have suffered much because of him in a dream." And that's it. Obviously, her husband ignored what she said and went ahead anyway. But you still wonder, is there a deeper significance to this? Who was this woman? Or was the dream sent to her by the Lord? And if so, why was it ineffectual? Because he went on anyway. Well, as it turns out, although the information is very, very scarce, the church does know this woman. And it knows her by the name of Procla. Procla, the wife of Pontius Pilate, is recognized as a saint of the church and is commemorated on October 27th. We don't know a whole lot about her, and there are some curious mentions of her in some very questionable places. For instance, in the Gospel of Nicodemus, the Acts of Pilate include mention of her. There are supposed letters of Pilate, one to Herod. Of course, Herod wrote him one. And one of Pilate to Tiberius Caesar himself that tried to describe certain things that happened. And even the silence among the church fathers might be considered deafening were it not for the fact that at least two early church writers, although not fathers of the church, meaning Tertullian and Origen, mention her. Tertullian speaks of her as well as of Pilate and sort of indicates that both of them converted to Christianity. Origen does not go so far as to bring Pontius Pilate into the rank of saints, but he does mention Procla as someone who is a saint. And so it's a very sort of strange thing that we encounter here because it involves apocryphal literature, questionable sources, Gnostic Gospels, all this sort of thing that the church does not recognize, at least not in their entirety. But as we know from the accounts of the Virgin Mary and her being raised in the temple, which is mentioned in one of these apocryphal sources, that not everything that is stated in these sources is necessarily false. The church, in her wisdom, most likely through her own tradition, which later found part of it in these different examples of sources, the church, in her wisdom, has come to proclaim certain things to us as true. And one of these, of course, is that Procla is a saint of the church. Now, we can't always be so sure of everything that comes from these sources, but yet there's enough testimony there and enough in the Christian tradition to give us this much at least. And that does satisfy us somewhat, because we always wonder, what was she thinking after this dream? What had happened? Well, according to some of these sources, she actually went with the centurion that we talked about last week, Longinus, that she went and saw our Lord Jesus Christ after he had risen from the dead and was witness to many, many of these miracles and the saints coming up from the dead and everything else that was mentioned in the Gospels of Matthew and Mark as having occurred after the Lord's resurrection. And that she had a son named Philo, whom she besought the Lord to heal because he was suffering from some sort of terrible affliction, and the Lord did heal him. And also there are some quotations from the Lord himself to Procla that are really quite beautiful. They are certainly not out of bounds as to what we know that the Lord actually said, as recorded in the Gospels and some of the other books of the New Testament. Pilate, who is also recognized as a saint by the Ethiopian church, is not recognized as such by the Orthodox Church. That has not come down to us, although it has to be taken seriously as a possibility, perhaps, but one that the church has not ruled on. But Procla herself, and as she's known as Claudia Procula in another source, which is the supposed letter that she had written describing exactly what had happened to her that turned up in about 1929, but yet is still of questionable provenance. It still sort of supports the idea that is floating through tradition that she indeed was a convert to Christianity and did end up following the Lord. Now, there are many other instances in the Menologian, the collection of all the services of the lives of the saints of the Orthodox Church. There are many instances where we don't know the names of some of these people. Some of them are certainly listed as, well, a daughter and her mother, or 2 sons and a father, or 40 members of the military who were slaughtered by such and such. And that's all we know. The Lord has not seen fit to give us any other information about them. And the Lord has not seen fit to give us any other information about the quiet mention of Saint Procula in the Gospels. This shouldn't distress us, because the Lord in his wisdom has decided who shall rise to the ranks of the most popular saints, the most worldwide known saints, and others that are simply to remain esoteric. They're supposed to be sort of out of sight. But yet the church gives us this hint that this woman who was upset because of a dream that perhaps our Lord Jesus Christ himself had given her to try to make an attempt to save her husband from the things that he was about to embark on. There are accounts of Pontius Pilate that show him essentially meeting a very bad end, and in fact Tiberius Caesar himself in one of these sought after his life. Whether this is true or not, we don't know, but we can be completely assured that this mysterious woman, this wife of the man that condemned our Lord Jesus Christ, found salvation in his holy church. God bless you all. Bye-bye.